First of all, good morning to all. I'm sorry for my voice and my pronunciation that are both not very good. So let me introduce myself. I'm Colonel Gianluca Bonci and I am the head of the Doctrine department and teacher of military history and command and control at the Italian Army Officers School in Turin. I would like also to present you Lieutenant Colonel Fabio Riggi. We did this article in 4 hands. And Second Lieutenant Angelo Scaccia, that is the punch ball of 2 old and tired officers like us. Okay. This is our agenda that basically replicates the paragraphs of the article that we have presented. The dawn of February 24th, 2022 showed to an astonished world the reappearance of a forgotten ghost, a great conventional war in Europe. The images of helicopters loaded with assault troops thundering through the skies and armored columns pushing towards the heart of Ukraine immediately reminded the major maneuvered operation that took place in those same regions during the World War II, or the fulminating ones conducted by the Israelis in the Middle East over the course of 4 conflicts, or the very brief but intense 100 hours war in 1991 in the decisive phase of Operation Desert Storm. These operations are still alive in the current culture and training of the Western armies. But after the first few weeks, the operations in Ukraine began to take rather different characteristics from those of the examples described before. The form of attrition war. In this presentation, we will try to give some explanations to this long struggle between these 2 different ways of approaching military operation. The so-called manoeuvrist approach is currently one of the cornerstones of NATO doctrine, conceived as an indirect approach aimed at targeting the conceptual and moral components of the opponent's fighting power rather than the physical one. It is applied by using a combination of 2 techniques, seizing and holding the initiative, and attacking the enemy's understanding, will, and cohesion, and it is governed by the following principles: application of mission command, focus on enemy's vulnerabilities, exploit opportunities, bold and decisive action, and agility. The NATO publication fully includes the maneuverist approach among the pillars on which to base the planning and conduct of land operations, linking it once again to the concept of mission command and introducing as a peculiar aspect of tactical land combat that of combined arms. The deeds of the great maneuverist commanders of the past show us the many good reasons why it is logical and acceptable to pursue this philosophy of warfare in a determined manner. In this way, it is possible to win rapidly, economically, in terms of losses and sources, and very often with definitive results. Relating to this concept, we certainly include the German Blitzkrieg of 1939-41 and the Glubokaya Operatia, the deep operations doctrine, developed and introduced by Marshal Mikhail Tukhachevsky in the Red Army during the 30s. Actually, at least over the last few centuries, in Europe and North America, what is exactly the opposite side of the coin, namely the attrition warfare, has perhaps manifested itself most and with greater force. Richard Simpkin, in his important work specifically dedicated to this topic, Race to the Swift, recalls how, during a real conflict or campaign, the phases in which maneuvered operation and battles take place and those in which the logic of friction and attrition prevails are both present, and they alternate and influence each other in a dynamic interaction. Robert Leonard, in his book dedicated to the same subject, The Art of Maneuver, observes from the very first pages how even in the 90s, in the US Army, the mentality and a good part of the doctrine and technical tactical procedures were still profoundly influenced by an orientation towards the concept of friction and physical destruction of the enemy, rather than on the idea of maneuver. There are cases in which armies that had theorized and doctrinally emphasized the concept of maneuver were forced to accept the logic of friction under the weight of the condition imposed by the battlefield or technological evolution. This is what happened, for example, on the Western Front in 1914 and 15. At this point, it is possible to describe what, after 2.5 years of operation, appears to be increasingly clear on the Ukrainian battlefields. In the early stage of the so-called special military operation, the Russian Federation ground forces quickly wedged themselves into Ukrainian territory following multiple axes of advance aimed at as many operational objectives represented by the main urban centers of northeast Ukraine, like Kharkiv, Sumy, Chernihiv, the capital Kiev, the areas of Donbass not yet under the control of the separatist republics, and other crucial coastal cities in the south of the country, such as Kherson at the mouth of the Dnieper, Mariupol, and Berdyansk. The Kremlin, in fact, expected an immediate collapse of the Ukrainian government and the consequent weak resistance of its armed force. In essence, what the Russians had prepared and expected to carry out was a repeat of the invasion of Hungary in 1956, Czechoslovakia in 1968, and Afghanistan in 1979. Certainly not a new Operation Bagration conducted by the Red Army in 1944, just to give another example of large-scale warfighting operation. Inevitably, this great strategic miscalculation has produced serious consequences at the operational and tactical level. Starting in the second half of March, this development ended. Russian offensive operation reached its culminating point, especially in the northern and northeastern Ukraine. In the following month of April, recognizing the failure of attempt to take Kiev, the Russian ground forces began to retreat from all of northern Ukraine and to concentrate in the eastern regions. Since then, the rapid maneuver operation of the major Russian formation ceased and a slower, more methodical offensive began in Donbass, and characterized by systematic attacks and by the intense use of artillery fire. The war has turned from a ground campaign conducted with highly dynamic operation to a series of deliberate offensives aimed at wearing down and destroying the enemy forces defending the Donbass. In practice, a very rapid transition from a maneuverist approach to a battle of attrition. from a sort of Blitzkrieg into a great and exhausting material schlacht. Alexander Svechin, in his book Strategy, the first to define in a coherent and structured way the concept of operational level and art, says an accurate economic and military preparation for war is essential. For this reason, it can be said that he would probably have disapproved the lack of accuracy demonstrated in the early stage of the invasion by the Russians. Svechin also explained how a lack of preparation can easily lead to the deplorable stalemate of a trench warfare, a situation from which it is then very difficult to exit by returning to the conduct of rapid and decisive operations. At the beginning of the invasion, Tukhachevsky, together with his student Isterson, would perhaps have viewed favorably on the deep and aggressive advance of Russian armored formations, as well as some air assault operation, above all that on Hostomel airport, that recalled the principle expressed in the deep battle, but would certainly not have approved, like Svechin, the deficient preparation, especially in terms of logistic support, which he considered essential to feed the great needs of the offensive operation in depth, as he conceived them. Then, and most importantly, the reduced quantity of forces employed for the initial invasion probably undermine any possibility of developing operation of this side according to the principles of maneuver warfare. As Simpkin has in fact admirably explained, also on the basis of the study of Soviet offensive operation in the Second World War, the basic model of maneuver warfare is the division of force into two large groups, the mobile forces and the holding force. In short, to generate that leverage effect that can be decisive, the first acts as a lever pivoted on the second, and then goes to act on an enemy mass blocked and held back by the same holding force. Added to this, the concept of maximum contact, specific to Tukhachevsky theory, that is attacking on the widest possible front, and then making deep penetration, breaching the weakest points. Still referring to the Russian initial errors, there is another personality of the great pantheon of Soviet military reformers, Marshal Ogarkov, who would be critical of what happened, having in his study warned how in modern warfare the initial operations are crucial for the final success. After at least 3 decades that have seen armies, especially Western ones, engaged in peace support operations or in long counterinsurgency campaigns, the war in Ukraine now shows us, in a classic back to the basic, a whole series of elements that were already known regarding the conduct of a real war. The great importance that both armies in the conflict attribute to artillery, confirmed by the presence in the battle order of the brigades on both sides of 2 battalions of single tube artillery and a 3rd unit, a whole battalion for the Russian army, of multiple rocket launchers, which is almost double and triple what is the NATO standard. Modern fine control system, such as the innovative Ukrainian Kropvia system, developed with a commercially derived technology. Consolidated use of UAVs as sensor for targeting and fire observation. Importance and confirmed effectiveness of precision guide munition has inspired the use of the term artillery sniping, like HIMARS. High defensive value of field fortification, minefield, and in this, consequently, the need to preserve and improve the engineer capability and assets, including those required for river crossing operation. A sort of return to the siege warfare, especially by the Russian, with the assaults of large urban centers, such as Mariupol, Bakhmut, Avdiivka, etc. The rethinking of the structure based on the battalion tactical group, poorly suited to sustaining operation over a long period, with a return to the traditional structured base on stronger and more homogeneous regiments, brigades, and divisions. The implementation of the concept of no-contact warfare, illustrated by Major General Vladimir Slipchenko and drawn from the study of Operation Desert Storm, which implies the capabilities to strike with long-range precision strike system the entire depth of theatre of operation, and even the entire enemy territory, and realize a comprehensive way of conducting a war even at the operational and strategic levels. The proliferation and ubiquity of UAS systems, which lead to the introduction of the concept of transparent battlefield, which has, as consequence, the ever-increasing difficulty in achieving surprise at all levels of war, strategic, operational, and tactical. As we know, surprise remains a fundamental element for any offensive operation based on the maneuver of forces, the lack of which can completely undermine the result, as demonstrated in the Ukrainian counteroffensive of the summer 2023. Finally, the confirmed effectiveness of the most used weapon system in defensive combat, such as anti-tank guided missiles systems, anti-aircraft missiles, and artillery, seems more lethal in crushing offensive than in supporting them, as often happened in the past. This, even before the outbreak of the conflict, led some authors to speak of the superiority of defense over offense. This reality, obviously the Ukrainian one, should be a concrete warning for Western countries which have downsized military industrial capacity and sacrificed scale and effectiveness for efficiency. In this regard, it is worth remembering that the Ukrainian Ministry of Defense declared, again in May 2022, the use of around 500 anti-tank missiles per day, and that in 3 months of fighting, from March to May 2022, Russia launched in the territory of Kiev about 2,700 cruise missiles. To face this challenge, new industrial policies and substantial investments will be necessary, aimed not only at the technical and qualitative aspect of the armaments, but also a substantial increase in terms of quantities. New financial investments, increase in production, especially ammunition and anti-tank and ballistic missiles, production partnership, research into technological standardization of platform, extension of logistic communality are all aspects that Western military leaders will have to wisely direct and coordinate as priority requests towards the political sphere. The availability of raw materials and the developed industrial base are crucial factors for success, to which must be added the probably main resource, the availability of manpower. Western armies are victims of the progressive Afghanization that has led to the progressive abandonment of the medium and heavy component of the combat forces, artillery, anti-aircraft artillery, in favor of the light one, more expendable in theatres such as Iraq or Afghanistan. This drift also included training, the formulation and development of doctrine, and the procurement of combat materials. With this in mind, there is also an urgent need for measures aimed at recruiting personnel and expanding the ranks of the armies, a consequence of the reduction suffered by the most common operational scenarios in the last 30 years, low-intensity counterinsurgency 1. The abolition of compulsory conscription, the subsequent decades of anti-militarism, and the progressive destruction of the values of patriotism in its positive declination, let me say, have made the return to military service a path that is not only politically unviable, but also socially unacceptable. So, let's see from training and education, because I work in a school like this. So, recent conflict, Syria, Ukraine, and Middle East should have immediate repercussion on military education and training for Western armies. First of all, for basic military education, it is necessary a great return of history and the study of the classical military literature, with particular attention to case study focused on conventional warfare, manoeuvre, and attrition. Inclusion of case study focused on the planning and conduct of modern joint force combat operation, with the widespread and in-depth treatment of the aspects linked to the multi-domain operation. The introduction of wargaming, which aims to stimulate critical thinking and acquire theoretical and doctrinal baggage, also based on the knowledge of the past. The search for mobility and fluid in-depth maneuver is also a priority requirement in training, which should increasingly tend towards the use of combined arm complexes from a joint and multinational perspective. For infantry units, will be necessary and important to return to platoon-level trench digging, training, and battlefield position strengthening work techniques. Will be crucial to introduce the study and management of the behavioral and sociological dynamics of the battle, so that young officers can have all the tools to be able to guide their men in combat, managing stress level, group dynamics, inevitable moments of discouragement and fear, getting the most out of their unit. So, I should have finished the presentation, but allow me now to make a small digression, if I may, linked to the topics that we have discussed yesterday in a briefing in which an in-depth analysis on Blitzkrieg was requested. First of all, I would like to point out that the Germans never codified Blitzkrieg as a real military doctrine. It was rather an Anglo-Saxon journalistic term that spread following the brilliant results obtained in 1939 in Poland. The one presented in this slide is a theoretic scheme of maneuver for Blitzkrieg. Like any other military operation, it is divided in phases, as you can see from the slide. So, for example, first phase, identification of one or more precise weak points on the enemy device, the Schwerpunkt, okay, for the Germans, that for the Battle of France in 1940, they were respectively Dinant for the 15th Panzer Corps of General Hoth and Sedan for the 19th Panzer Corps of Guderian. The second phase is attack and breach of the enemy front lines with a strong armored component, carry out with possibly envelopment maneuvers. The third phase is outflanking opposition, also with the help of airborne units, and after the creation of pocket of resistance through encirclement. After this, deep penetration and exploitation of success by armored units. The sixth phase is mopping up the enemy resistant pocket by the mechanized infantry that were at that time the Panzer Grenadier unit. In all this, the Air Force supports the maneuver, the ground maneuver, both in the first line and in depth, up to 200, 300 kilometers. So the real innovation of this was the operational tempo of the maneuver that was linked to the speed of progression of the armored vehicles and not to the infantry. And it was the first real use of combined arm complexes in war. Okay? But Blitzkrieg was also something else. It is about the way in which the orders were given, in a concise, clear and precise manner, in order to leave ample discretion for the commander on the ground, a concept that we define in our doctrine, mission command. Just to give you an example, the order given by the 19th Corps to the 1st Panzer Division in charge of the decisive operation on Sedan were 2 simple pages, while that of the 1st Panzer Division to the 1st Panzer Grenadier Regiment Hermann Bolk was limited to 250 words. It is about the great spirit of initiative in which the officers were trained since they were young lieutenants, like you. General Rommel, with his 7th Division, the Ghost Division, replicated to Dinant what he did on foot on the Matajur in 1917, and which led to the Italian defeat of Caporetto. It involves precise planning of operation preceded by careful wargaming, oriented towards achieving a geographical objective on specific axis rather than destroying the adversary, as the Soviet deep battle claimed, and a reasonable acceptance of risk. So, it is yesterday I have heard that it happened because happened, but let me disagree with this. It happened because it had been exactly planned to arrive at Calais and Antwerp as soon as possible, passing along those routes that would have cut the Allies' army in half, just like a sickle blow, in the northern France and Belgium. The Blitzkrieg was therefore a mix between an approach to combined arms, military operation, a common philosophy and the specific inclination and attitudes of the commanders that mature through mutual trust and lots of training. Thank you for attention.